Let's turn to Seth Kaplan. Seth is with the industry publication Airline Weekly and joins us from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Seth, thanks for being on the program.
Thanks for inviting me, Asiye.
So this plane had undergone repairs just a day before, apparently because of some kind of technical problems. We don't know what those issues were, but you got to ask the question if this plane should have been in the air.
Yeah, it's a fair question, and one that we don't yet know the answer to. To be clear, certainly maintenance issues are very common. I think all of us who travel with some frequency have been aboard an aircraft where, there's been some sort of a delay, for example, mechanics on board fixing something. So until we know that this is something beyond that same thing that we've all experienced and been fortunate to survive, hard to say that that's anything out of the ordinary. It's something that happens thousands of times around the world each day. And again, almost everybody survives flying on planes that had indeed been maintained recently.
Lufthansa is actually treating this disaster as an accident, but is it too soon to simply rule out foul play?
To rule out, yes. And candidly, Asiye, I was a bit surprised at the statement by the U.S. government that sort of suggesting that you could rule out terrorism. To be perfectly clear about this as well, the best guess is that it's not. But at this point, there's maybe a bit too little information. But all of the signs are sort of consistent with some sort of controlled descent. Obviously something went terribly wrong, but not the kind of thing that, if you're sort of making an educated guess here, and that's really all we're doing at this point without more information, something where you certainly wouldn't think it would be, terrorism or a crime. So I would agree with what Lufthansa said, that, the starting point here is that, yes, this is probably an accident, but too soon to conclude that.
And Seth, every time we have these types of air disasters, obviously at this point, we do not know what went wrong. We don't have the answers. But we do know in this case, there was no distress call from the cockpit. And the 8-minute rapid descent after it reached a safe cruising altitude, there was that 8-minute descent. Does that tell us anything?
Well, first of all, the good news, if you can call it that, is that because this was a crash, yes, in marshy areas, but essentially on land, because we already have one of the two black boxes, apparently the voice recorder, and the other likely to be found without too much trouble. This is not, for example, MH370, a total mystery where we still know so little, well over a year later. This is something where we're going to find out what happened. As for what that could have been, it's still hard to say because there is just so little information. But that very rapid descent, indicates that the plane doesn't seem to have, for example, we know it didn't just sort of explode in midair. We know that there is a debris field, and yet it descended much more rapidly than anything normal. The fact that there wasn't a distress call, although certainly it would be helpful in terms of understanding this to have had one, not by itself particularly surprising, because there's a saying among pilots, and they're taught this in training, that you aviate, navigate, and communicate in that order. And what that means, Asiye, is that above all, if you've got an absolute emergency where you have to choose between just trying to maintain control of the plane, perhaps trying to get to an alternative airport and then sort of communicating with the ground, you maintain control first. Then if you've done that, you try to go in a reasonable direction. And only if you've gotten that degree of control do you try to even do something as simple as call Mayday. So if things were as bad as they certainly appear to have been, not a shock. And in fact, the pilots very well might have been doing exactly what we would hope they would do by trying to fly the plane first.
So let's talk about this debris field. Talk to me about the difficulty of reaching this difficult terrain. Not a single piece of debris, by the way, is apparently bigger than a small car. This plane, Seth, obliterated.
Yeah, so obviously a challenge. If you were ranking it, if you could say that, in difficulty compared to other crashes. Again, I mentioned MH370, for example, other crashes in the water. This one will be less difficult than, of course, 370, but also than some of those other crashes where the debris field was at the bottom of an ocean, because that's just far more difficult to deal with. It will not be as easy as if you had a crash on easily accessible land that, for example, was not marshy, where there wasn't any kind of water around. So this is somewhere in between. Certainly the fact that it was, as has been said, sort of pulverized won't be helpful, that you don't have large, pieces of debris. That's not going to be helpful. But again, the fact that, here we are less than a day after, already with a black box and so forth, I am quite confident that the investigators are going to get to the bottom of this one, although you're absolutely right that it's not going to be easy.
All right. Thank you so much, sir. Seth Kaplan.